Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Jamara Davis Welch, and I'm back with some more insights from my new book, High Value, The Prayer of a Queen. In our previous discussions, we've explored how Esther prepared through fasting, how she approached God with reverence and confessed those ancestral sins, how she shared her raw honesty about how she felt about her position, and most recently, how she prayed concerning her enemies. Today, we're going to dive into something that affects every one of us, and that is fear. At the very end of her prayer, Esther makes this request. She said, "O God, who hast power over all, hearken to the voice of the desperate, and deliver us from the hand of them that devise mischief, and deliver me from my fear." Let's talk about what happens in our bodies when fear takes hold. Medical science shows that fear triggers a cascade of hormones. Cortisol and adrenaline flood our system. This can literally freeze us in place. It's called the fight, flight, freeze response. And while it's meant to protect us, like slamming on brakes when a car suddenly stops or jumping away from danger, it can also paralyze us from taking necessary action. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. For example, that meeting where you needed to speak up, but suddenly your mouth went dry and your mind went blank. Yeah, I've been there too, sitting in that chair, heart racing, trying to remember what it was I needed to say. You see, when these stress hormones flood our system, they actually impact our brain's ability to think clearly. The amygdala, which is our brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making, becomes suppressed. It's like having your emergency brake on while trying to drive forward. On the one hand, your body's doing exactly what it's designed to do in danger. But on the other hand, if not properly checked or controlled, this same response can prevent you from taking divinely inspired action when you need it most. As a sidebar, in case you are wondering, no, I am not a medical doctor. I am an educator, scholar, and an entrepreneur with a PhD who has done research on this topic. Why? Because I believe that understanding how fear affects us physically also helps us to combat it spiritually. Now, while science explains how fear affects us physically, faith gives us the power to act despite these natural responses. Just like a muscle that grows stronger with exercise, our faith grows stronger each time we choose to trust God over our fear response. I want you to think about Esther's situation. She had experienced significant trauma, being taken from her home, forced into the king's harem, living under constant threat. Each of these experiences could trigger that fight, flight, freeze response. She faced death if she approached the king uninvited, and her people faced extinction if she remained silent. The natural response of her body could have been to freeze, to stay silent, to remain paralyzed by that fear. But here's what's powerful. She didn't pray for the fear to go away on its own. She specifically asked God to deliver her from it. Throughout history, fear has been used as a tool of control. Dictators, abusers, oppressive systems, you name it, they all have one thing in common, and that is that they use fear to keep people submissive and inactive. In fact, studies show that prolonged exposure to fear can create learned helplessness where people stop believing that they can change their situation. I want you to think about mainstream media today. Haven't you noticed how often the same fearful narratives are repeated across multiple channels? It's almost like some kind of coordinated effort to keep people in a state of anxiety and uncertainty. Research shows that when people are constantly exposed to fear-inducing information, their stress response system stays activated, leading to decreased immune function, impaired decision-making, and even changes in brain structure. This is why God commands us to fear not. It isn't just spiritual advice. It's protective guidance for our whole being. Throughout Scripture, we see God's instruction to fear not, and He gives us the faith to overcome it. When Moses faced Pharaoh, when David faced Goliath, and when Esther faced the king, faith in God and His power was their active weapon against fear. This admonition to fear not appears more than 60 times throughout the Bible, from Joshua before the battle, to Mary before the miraculous, to the disciples in the storm. And here's what's crucial. True courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from faith that overcomes fear. You see, faith isn't just about not feeling afraid. It's about trusting God more than we fear our circumstances. It's about believing that God's promises are more real, that they are sure than our present fears. And if you really think about it, being fearful could be considered as being self-focused or full of self, while being fearless allows us to focus on others. Now, let's be clear, don't get it twisted. I'm not talking about that foolish kind of fearless where you're hanging off somebody's skyscraper or you're sticking your head in a crocodile's mouth for social media fame. That's not courage. That's just stupid. That's a death wish. Now, think about it. Had Esther remained paralyzed by fear for her own safety, an entire nation could have been wiped out. Let me share two powerful scriptures that speak directly to overcoming fear. In Isaiah 41:10, God tells us, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And in 2 Timothy 1:7, we are reminded, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." These aren't just comforting words. These are promises that we can actively stand on when our bodies and our minds are telling us to freeze. Just like Esther, you might be facing a situation that seems overwhelming. Maybe you've been paralyzed by fear of failure, rejection, success, fill in the blank. I want you to remember, Esther didn't just acknowledge her fear. She actively sought God's deliverance from it. Her vulnerability in admitting her fear wasn't weakness. It was a demonstration of deep faith and understanding of her need for divine strength. Esther's prayer shows us that faith isn't passive. It's an active choice to trust God's power over our fears. When she said, "Deliver me from my fear," she was choosing to place her faith in God's ability to protect her over her very real reasons to be afraid. And God answered her prayer, and he answered powerfully, giving her the courage to approach the king, the wisdom to present her case, and ultimately the victory she needed. Now, share in the comments, what's one way that you've seen God help you overcome fear? Or share a scripture that you have used to help you in your times of fear. In closing, remember, depending on your preferred platform, you can find me on TikTok at SM Society JW, on Instagram at the SM Society, and on YouTube at the Supermodel Society. Also, if you haven't already done so, go get your copy of High Value, The Prayer of a Queen. Again, you can get it on Amazon or Google Play. With that, salama and barakah, in other words, peace and blessings.